Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Small Biz Ahead. It's John Iconis here, joined with Gene Marks. We are in the middle of our Money Week series. So if you've been listening to the other content, you know that we're having a whole bunch of conversations around different ways you can think about financing your small business or your kind of small business goals. Today we had a really interesting conversation with someone named Leonardo Shapiro about a topic that we all probably think of and have strong opinions on, and it's should you get money from your friends and family? And what to kind of know about that. And Gene, I thought it was an interesting conversation. I think some really good points made, and made me think a little bit differently about if I was to ask, someone I'm related to or close with for a loan, how I might kind of approach that conversation, or if I would at all.
Yeah, John, it's like it's one of the top ways that businesses, particularly startup businesses, get their financing is it's their personal savings, and they also tap their friends and family to do it. Leonardo discussed his experiences. He's like an entrepreneur. He's founded a few companies. He's borrowed money from his friends, and family. He's gotten venture financing as well. And he's had some good and bad experiences doing it, which we'll share in the conversation. I have to tell you one thing though. I walked away from this conversation still not convinced that I would ever borrow money from a friend or from a family member. I mean, I know some people have to do it, so that's of course understandable. But geez, I just can't imagine. He told one story about how he borrowed money from I think a family member, and then he went on vacation. And he was being asked like, oh, why are you going on vacation so soon after, and I was like, oh my God, that's the last thing I need in my life is like my, Uncle Joe, questioning what I'm doing with my, my personal time. Do you know what I mean?
I do. And what's interesting, right? Because I think we often talk about how, as a business owner, especially if you're an owner operator, there's a lot of lack of separation between you and your business. So if someone's giving you money for your business, and you brought up the example, and you have to buy a car.
Yeah.
If the car looks new and nice, does that imply that oh, you borrowed money for a car, right? It's an interesting subject. I'm kind of with you. I don't know that I would seek that. I don't know that I always love to be asked for money either on the other side. So it's one of those things where it might not be right for me, but it could be a good resource for other people. I think what we did learn is it's still a business transaction, right? And he had some good tips and I think insight on how to structure it as such, how to really kind of educate personal lenders to kind of think like investors, the importance of transparency, the importance of being honest and setting expectations. So I think it was a really productive conversation, and think that folks will find some interesting tidbits in there. So I hope if you're listening and watching that you enjoy. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Small Biz Ahead, the small business podcast presented by the Hartford. This is John. I am joined by my co-host, Gene Marks. Gene, how are you doing today?
I am doing okay, John, and very interested for this conversation to take place so people can hear it. I don't know if I have a single friend or family member that I would considering borrowing money from, but it's a big source of capital for small businesses. So interesting conversation about to happen.
That is true. So yes, if you're listening or watching, because we're now doing video, we're welcome to the 21st century, right? You probably already got the indication from the title and the intro that we are here to talk about different ways you can raise capital for your small business. And this episode specifically is around raising money from friends and family. So to give us their perspective on that, we have Leonardo Shapiro, who has a history of kind of founding and co-founding a couple companies that were really built around democratizing access to capital and funds to business owners who might not historically been as served as those with privilege. I think he's got point of view on lending. I think he's going to be able to talk about the pros and cons about asking people for money, how you should, how you shouldn't. And I think it's going to be a really valuable conversation on a different way to kind of think about revenue for your business. So we will welcome Leonardo to the chat.
Good morning, guys. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. So, Leonardo, maybe to get started, you can just tell our listeners a little bit about you and your kind of journey as a founder and someone who's kind of built a career on helping people access, the means to kind of do their own thing.
Sure, John. Thank you so much. Well, I'm excited to be here. I mean, I think raising money from friends and family, it's always kind of tricky, but it's a pretty maybe easy or kind of source of capital. So there's kind of a lot of do's and don'ts over there. And I think I have my fair share of misses and hits there. So happy to share. So I'm originally from Mexico City. I moved to the Bay Area, I think about 10 years ago. I started three companies, one in Mexico, two in the US, and all of them had some component of raising money. I mean, they were all venture-backed companies. So we had VCs, we had professional investors, we had family offices, we had all those guys. But the first little checks were always friends and family.
Gotcha.
And it's I mean it's I think there's a thin red line there. It's a fine balance. It can go really well, it can go really bad, and I think it's just about integrity and about transparency. So happy to share a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's great. So it's interesting that you said kind of the first, like drops in the bucket tended to come from friends and family. So maybe we just start there. So you have an idea, you're thinking about getting it going. You need the capital to do it, or you need to kind of start thinking about like, how do I finance this new idea? And some people might decide they want to work while they do that. Some people might not be able to because the idea is going to take up all their, their passion, their breath, their air, their time. They're not going to sleep. They're going to be kind of building this new thing. So you need to kind of go to people who you know and love and trust to kind of get a little bit to get started. So what's a conversation like that like? And to your point, like how do you set it up to be transparent and to kind of set some fair expectations? And how do you really know what to ask for?
Yeah, so my first company was when I was getting right out of college. So I had pretty much $0 in my bank account. So the need for raising money for friends and family was just like to keep the lights on, just to start the company.
Right.
And so I mean, I think the first one was like mom and dad, and it was kind of an interesting conversation because. It was kind of to set up the frame, it was early 2000s. The internet was just starting. A lot of people didn't know exactly what the thing was. And when I was trying to describe my business, a lot of people just gave me like a quick pat in the back, and they told me, just why don't you get like a real job, right? What is this thing about inventing stuff? And, you're going to this. It was just like
Right.
very, very new. So I mean, I think I approached it like a son would approach a mom and a dad, and he was, well, I have this idea, and maybe you guys don't understand what this is, but this is going to change. It's going to revolutionize the world, and it was pretty much sales pitch, right? I mean, I was trying to sell my mom, and I was trying to sell my dad on the idea that they were going to give me kind of a little bit of money to do something, and at that time, I think I was kind of young, and I didn't even think about the implications of getting a cent from your family, right? I didn't know what was like the fiduciary responsibility that we're getting into. I didn't know what was the expectation from the other part of reporting back and to kind of give you some information. And again, mom and dad are mom and dad, and in particular case, my mom and dad, I mean, did support me with a little bit of money. And kind of they both said, well, I don't understand exactly what you're doing. I don't understand anything of what you're doing, but I mean, we will support you. And it was much more kind of a, how much do you need, right? And it was like, well, I need this. Well, we can give you that. And kind of that was kind of the first time when I said like, this is easy, right? You just go and you ask for people for money, and it works. So that was kind of the first injection of capital into the company. We didn't even document that as anything. I mean, I didn't know that you had to do anything. You had to do safes, you have to do promissory notes, convertible notes, whatever kind of mechanism that you wanted to use to convert money. So, and of course, that money kind of evaporated in like a second, right? So it was like, okay, let's do it again. And it was not going to be mom and dad anymore. It was going to be kind of the next circle. And I think that's when it gets more interesting, because kind of in the first part is, I mean, I think we go to friends and family because it feels that is a kind of a easier or closer source of capital, because there's kind of this pre-existing relationship of trust that somehow is hedging your success rate as a founder, or your FICO score, whatever other mechanism it's required for you to get capital. And I pitched in this particular case two of my closest friends, and I think this is when I learned some of the basic stuff. So I think the first one is you should never pitch somebody that you know cannot afford it, and I did that, right? And I mean I was not super clear that I was pitching somebody who could not afford it, but when business happens, and sometimes business doesn't go as you expected, right? If that person was counting on that money as for, I don't know, tuition, or like for a more primary need, you're gonna get in trouble, right? So I think that was my rule number one. I mean, even though I think as you develop a track record as an entrepreneur, and some of those investments I mean, you got good exits, and you can give back good returns. I learned that, and this is one of my primaries. Even though that this might be a great opportunity, I approach my friends and tell them, let's just imagine that you went to Vegas, right? And you're willing to burn X amount of dollars on the table or in a roulette, or whatever. This is exactly the same thing, right? The minute that you give me this check, you have to consider that this is gone. And if you cannot approach this investment from that perspective, I'd rather be your friend forever and go and drink some beers and eat some tacos than actually getting into well, you lost my money that I was going to use for tuition for my kids.
Right. Well, it's interesting you say that, because it is still a business transaction. And I think that's probably where it's hard to have those conversations, because I think sometimes people want to go to family or friends because it's like, you know me, you trust me. To your point, you're not looking at my FICO score. You might have the means, you might not. But I think there's a couple things to consider. Is that they're really making a behavioral based decision, right? So it's kind of it is kind of like a lender. Do you have the track record and the means and the expectation that you're going to have the means to kind of pay this back? But I think the other thing is it's not so much a victimless crime if you don't. So if this is really a loan versus a gift, or kind of a loan that's expected to be paid back the same way when you lend someone $20 and I'm going to get it back the next day, it's a different mentality, right? And there is a sense of kind of that personal obligation, I would think, both from the person asking and the person giving, that this money isn't coming from a capital source of a private bank, or being raised off interest of other things. Like, it could be someone's college savings, it could be someone's retirement, it could be kind of their rainy day healthcare fund. So both understanding that it could be gone, but I think there's probably even more of a sense of obligation as you as the borrower to say, I really want to pay this back, because the last thing you'd want to do really is hurt someone you care about.
Yeah, I think you said something pretty important, John, over there, which is, I think when you pitch somebody, when you get investment from a friend, you need to understand, you need to be really straight if this is a loan or this is an investment, right? If this is a loan, people would expect to get it back, and they would expect to get it back in certain time frame, and probably with certain capital gain on the loan. If this is an investment, is kind of less known, and people, I mean, I think who are not professional investors, have never invested in a business before, they might not know the difference, right? So I think it's super important to be transparent and say, I don't know when I'm going to give you this money back. I don't know if I'm going to give you this money back. I have no idea what the return is, and this is what I'm planning to do with your money. Something that it's really interesting as well is how the behavior of your friends change the minute that you do a financial transaction. I remember one of my dear friends, the next time we saw each other, he kind of received me in his office, right? And he was just like, what's going on here, right? And it was like, well, I would love you to give me kind of a report on the business. And he was like, what are you talking about? What kind of a report are you expecting? It's like, well, it's like gave you money, right? And the same way that I, treat my other investors, I want to know is like, okay, how's the product going? Do you have targets? Are you meeting expectations? basic business hypothesis turned out to be true, and it was like, whoa, this is so strange, right? And it's I mean, I think it changes a lot, and I think it's pretty important to set the basis in the beginning. Another thing, I'm sorry for jumping in, but another thing that it was pretty important is also set to expectations of how much time you're going to devote to give info. Right? When you're running a business and you really want to be as nimble as possible, and you want to be able to execute, and the last thing they want to do is somebody calling you like, hey, can you give me a report of the business right now? It's like, no, I'll send an email once a month saying how we're progressing at advising.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I think sometimes it's hard to be direct with your friends and family. We often want to kind of err on the side of pleasant conversation than probably like how we would have to think about kind of our business communications, right? So what's interesting and what I've seen from folks who have taken personal relationships and made them investment relationships is that the lenders in that case don't always understand the difference between investing in something and co-owning or managing or consulting on something. Because I think it's really easy when you know someone and you say, okay, I gave you, 50 grand to go chase your dream. I have an opinion on how you should do that. And because I know you and I'm comfortable with you and I trust you, and maybe in some cases you're my kid, I'm going to let you know my opinion on how you should do what you do. And it can be a little awkward, right? To kind of draw some of those boundaries. So I think your kind of just very first statement about being really upfront on kind of what this is, how this should not impact our relationship, and kind of what your expectations should be as someone who's agreeing to give me this, this kind of source of funding is really important, because I think the lines get really murky when you talk about people who you know personally. And I think it all starts from good places, right? I think everyone's expertise is usually good intent because they want you to do the right thing, but the right thing in their mind might not be the right thing for your business. And that can be an interesting conversation to have. I've witnessed.
Yeah, I think in the argot of this profession, they tell you that the most expensive money is the one that you don't have, and I think I would change it. I think the most expensive money is the one that makes you lose a friendship, and I think you definitely approach it from that perspective, and be really, really just savvy on how and from who you're going to make this ask, right? I mean, in very specific cases, as you were mentioning at the beginning, you're not giving them a lot of choice, right? When you say, hey, I need 50, 10, whatever, it feels that they're going to have an obligation of do it because of the pre-existing relationship. And I think it's also super important to say, and just to give them a way out, right? And when I'm pitching somebody, it's like, and if this is not a good time, if you have other plans, if you're a little bit stretched too thin, don't worry about it. I mean, I'm just giving you the opportunity because I think it's probably going to be a good business, but just don't feel obligated. Just feel forced to do this and something that you just don't want to do.
Yeah, I think and I'm sure Gene, I'm just even the kind of comments on returns and interest in contracts. I think you're going to have a point of view there and a lot of questions, and I want to give you the chance to get to those.
Sure.
But I think the one other thing, kind of looking from the point of view of the lender, is that it's a good point, Leonardo, on kind of setting the expectations, but also I think understanding that personal money tends to be more emotional, and it's not just $5,000 or $10,000. That could be a wedding, right? That could be like a family vacation or a memory or something that you can't really quantify. So I do think that when you think about kind of requesting that money from people, it's hard for them sometimes to kind of like draw the line in the sand if it's a true loss or an investment that goes the other way or just takes longer to recoup, right? Because it's not just the cash, it's what they could have done, or the belief of what they could have done, or the romanticized version of what that money could have been. And I think it's also sometimes that money isn't just theirs, right? It could be the pressure of what a family member thinks because they don't have access to it. So whether that's a spouse or a kid or someone they support. So it is something I think to very seriously consider, because I really like that comment about the most expensive money is the one that makes you lose a relationship. And sometimes the perceived cost or value is much different just because it comes from a place of emotion and a place of personal kind of aspiration, which it's a different ballgame. But Gene, I know you're hungry to get in on terms, so I'm gonna.
I am, yeah. I mean, it's a great conversation. Leonardo. So you started a few different companies in your entrepreneurial life, and I think your most recent venture, if I'm not correct, is called Brex, Brex, at brex.com. Can you tell us a little bit about that company?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I wish that was my company. That's not a company that I started.
Okay.
But Brex is a financial services company that is based headquartered in San Francisco, and it's mostly kind of providing financial services for mid-size and venture-backed companies.
Got it. And financial services meaning loans, capital, that sort of thing, correct?
It's around credit cards and accounts to store money and so forth. Yes.
Good. Okay, that's great. So you mentioned earlier in the past that you have raised money in some of your entrepreneurial ventures from friends and family. The impression I got was that it was mostly loans. Is that right? Like, did because we talked about, or you mentioned about the shifting between whether it's debt or equity. Somebody's going to buy into a company, and you've leaned more towards debt over equity. Is that a fair statement?
It was more around equity. It was
Okay.
kind of convertible. It was convertible notes at the beginning, so it was some sort of kind of a debt, but with the idea that it was going to be invested as equity on the company.
Got it. Because I got to imagine, I mean, knowing you, in the brief time that we've met and, looking into, doing a little research about you, this is not the last company you're going to be involved with. I know you've got more companies to start, I can tell, in the future. And when you do that, based on everything you've learned so far, you're trying to raise capital. And let's assume you do want to go to family and friends to raise some money. Would you lean more towards selling shares of a new venture, or would you prefer to just borrow money from a family member or a friend? Like, would you lean either way?
I think it's going to depend on the type of company that you're building, right?
Hmm.
So if this is, I mean, most of the work that I've done, it's been around kind of creating enterprise value that at some point is going to have an exit.
Hmm.
And in that particular case, it's always kind of better to, at least in my perspective, to sell the idea that you're co-owning or you're just getting a little bit of the company. Uh, I I haven't done a kind of a loan like just typical, just create just kind of very clear loan with terms with friends.
Hmm.
Uh, I think I would feel really stressed out if I would do that. I
If you just
mean,
had a loan, you're saying.
yeah, I think
Right.
because I think when I've done these things before, I'm asking my friends and family to share the risk
Yeah.
and share the upside, right? So the idea is like, I always start the business with, we're gonna do this, and this is the idea, and this is the concept that we're trying to build, and one out of, I don't know, 1,000 times we're going to be successful, right? But if we are going to be successful, Google is going to come and buy our business,
Right.
and then it's going to be kind of a different conversation. Uh, I I haven't done the one which is like, I'm going to borrow some money from you and eventually just going to repay it back with some interest. Uh,
Right. If you're doing these transactions, how deep in the paperwork did you get with your family or your friends? Did you have formal written, here's a note agreement, or here's a share agreement, with them, or was it more of a handshake?
no, it's completely legal. I mean,
Right.
I try to do it as kosher as possible, right?
Right.
And make sure that everybody understands what's going on and everyone understands what kind of documents they're signing. And I mean, I was just like, my dad just like, slip me the papers. It was like, I don't need this. It was like, no, dad, you do need this, right? And if you
Right.
don't need that, I need that, right? I need you to know that what we're doing is structured, and I need you to know that eventually, when we need to have a conversation, or whatever conversation we need to have, there's going to be a paper that we need to go and we can reference and say, this is the terms that we kind of agreed.
Did you ever feel any self-consciousness, about, you're weaved in with your family and friends. They see how you're spending your money. Like, oh, Leonardo just bought a new car. Must be good for him with my money that I lent him. Did you ever run into those experiences where you were just self-conscious about how you were spending your money because you knew that you had families and friends that could be seeing what you're doing and may question?
Yeah. Actually, I did. And it was a very uncomfortable conversation with one of my investors because, I mean, it's not something that I would have not done, but I was taking a vacation and just he called me and he was like, "Oh, where are you?" I was like, "Oh, well, I'm in
Yeah.
whatever." And he was like, "You shouldn't be working."
Right.
And he's like, "Yeah, I work 11, 15, 13 hours a day. I need a vacation." It's like, "Yeah, but it feels kind of weird that no, I just gave you some money and you're taking a vacation." And what I told him is, okay, you're getting a check on the mail with your money back. So
Yeah.
I'm going to personally buy your shares. I'm going to personally do whatever you want to do. I don't want to have this conversation anymore. Still want to be your friend, but yeah, I don't feel. And again, maybe he was in his right mind to say, "Well, I just gave you money. Why are you taking a vacation? Why you're not working with it?" But it tends to have those conversations, right? I mean, it can happen.
Yeah, it certainly does. And listen, in any business, a lot of my clients, there's partners. I have one client's got like three brothers, and they're all married, and they all know what each other's up to in their personal lives. And yet they're all equity owners in the business. So, they talk, their spouses talk. It's just sometimes it complicates things. How about Leonardo? How about sharing information? Like if if a family member or friend loans you money. Or even if they buy shares in your company, which is a minority purchase, how have you felt about the obligation to then share with them the financials of your company? Is it their business or not, and how have you handled that?
Uh, I mean, I try to I try to be as transparent as possible without actually causing a big overhead on the company.
Right.
So, I mean, I think there's not things that nothing is kind of off the table with your investors, right? I mean, I think it's less about transparency of information. It's more about the time commitment of sharing those updates. So, and it's part of the kind of the negotiations when we're about to raise money. It's like, okay, this is how it's going to work. I'm going to send a newsletter. I'm going to send an email once a month, right?
Right.
I'm going to give you kind of the most important milestones. If you have any particular questions, feel free just to give me a call. But please, I mean, don't. I don't. I'm really building a product here. I'm running a company here. I don't have to want to have the obligation or the time to be with you on the phone for 30 minutes. And of course, as you were saying, sometimes you get phone calls like, "Hey, I think
Yeah.
that you probably should be doing this differently." And I mean, I think it's great, and every advice is good advice. But yeah, it tends to, again. I think it's all around the setting the expectations when things are starting. I think there are like two other pretty interesting things that happen there, at least on the work when you're kind of getting investors. Dilution is something that people just don't understand
Right.
if you're not a professional investor.
Right.
So at the beginning, you get like a convertible note or something that says that you own 10% of the company, and 6 months later something happens, and when you're starting, it's like, what happened to my 10%? It's like, well, other people came, you know, but you never told me about dilution, and it's like, well, I thought you knew that when other people put money there and they have preference on new money has preference of the other money. And so, I mean, I think it's a it's a very it's a very, very, very tricky world. And I think companies like AngelList or like all those have been facilitating this process of kind of creating. And this is what I did in my last company. I created an LLC, and it was
Hmm.
like, okay, it's going to be friends and founders and friends and
Hmm.
family, and and it was like a vehicle that it was like shielding all the noise from everybody there. And it was just like one entity, and it was not like 20 people on the cap table or 30 people on the cap table trying to manage and trying to explain why somebody has, this very little money when you're also raising more money, which I think is also pretty important. Finding your investors or your debt holders in this particular case, it's always going to affect how your ability to raise more money in the future. So when there's like so many people involved in the company, a lot of people tend to say, well, this can get messy really quickly, right? So
you mentioned also that you brought in venture capitalists. You've got venture capitalist funding in the past. Yeah, as outside investors, you start bringing them into your company. What has been what's been their take on family members being involved in the business? Do you find them open to having fellow shareholders or debt holders that are family members, or do you find that outside investors as they come in are like, we should probably push these guys out because they're going to be more of a problem than a help? What's been the response from outside investors?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's always this. It's not a term that I like, but anyway, I think there's always this concept of debt weight on the cap table when there's like, who is this person and why am I investing along him or her, or they? And I think the advice that I've been getting is consolidation. It's just, okay, I understand this is your friends, this is your family. So like put them on one kind of vehicle, like an LLC, and name somebody who's going to be the participant in the meetings of the company shareholders meeting, and somebody to represent that, because it's going to be really hard when you do like a shareholders meeting to have 50 people just trying to give impression and attention on that. So I think it's expected to have some friends and family money on any company. I think it's just like the balance of how do you execute and how do you manage this, how do you shield them from the complexity as well.
Fair enough. All right. Well, listen. I can tell you, like, I get three big takeaways from this conversation, Leonardo. And I don't know if John, you're getting the same vibe. I mean, first of all, if you're going to be either getting an investment from or a loan from a family member or a friend, it's super important to educate that person as to what their expectations are going to be, and what they're investing in, and things like dilution, what they can expect going forward. I think like any S1, S1 is the SEC document that companies file when they go public. There's a whole section on risk factors. It's important they're upfront, members and friends as to all the potential risk factors of the business, including like, hey, I might decide to take a vacation once in a while. That's not, it doesn't mean that I'm like spending your money inappropriately or whatever. But one of the factors is, about this is the way that I run the company. And then the final thing also is documentation. I got as well as to making sure, even if your family member or friend is like, no, it's fine, we're buddies here, don't worry about it. It's super important to document yourself. Leonardo, is there anything else I'm missing? Like if I'm going to start up a new business next week and I'm looking to get money, I need funding. No bank is going to look at me. I got to turn to some families and friends. Is there any other advice that you have that I can take away besides what I've already mentioned? Yeah,
I think more than anything is that, and I think you already mentioned, but I just want to reiterate it because I think it's really important. Is that level of transparency and that level of understanding and telling your people who you really love and cherish you that there is a risk on the investment, and that you're going to do your best to mitigate the risk, but they need to come with their eyes really kind of open and knowing that it's money that probably they're not going to see back again, and they should feel comfortable with that investment.
Yeah, I like that, like couching it that way. Just say like, you're going to invest this money, and it's kind of like when I go to the casinos. I don't really actually go to the casinos very often, really. But if you're going to go, and you're going to bring $500 with you, for a night of gambling, your attitude should be like, I'm going to go home with nothing. If I do come home with something that's a bonus, that's great. But I'm expecting to lose that money, and I think you can raise that expectation among potential investors and potential debt holders of yourself that are family and friends. John, am I missing anything, or do you want to wrap things up?
Well, I think the interesting thing too is kind of when you talked about the paperwork with your dad, we've kind of said this before. I don't think you can underestimate a good lawyer who understands your business to
Sure.
advise on agreements, and to really treat all transactions, even if they're friendly in nature, about your business with that kind of lens, right? Because at the end of the day, we never know what's going to happen. It's good for everyone to be crystal clear on terms, just so everyone can kind of enter and understand, exactly what they're agreeing to. So I think that was really kind of smart and sharp advice. And I think the only other question I'd have is, when it comes to paying people back out of your business, or, if the investment kind of runs its course and you're kind of paying off your final, like, thank you. And now I'm moving on to my next round of funding, or I don't need, kind of that portion anymore. Do you prioritize kind of like friends and family over other things, or is it kind of like newer to older, or is it kind of different on different, agreements that you've had in companies that you've had, or what's your kind of philosophy on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So every time, normally when an institutional investor comes in, there is a possibility of exiting the business, and I tried to do that, and I tried to do that with my families and friends, either by personal means or the investor that is looking for kind of an additional placement on the company. So and that's the first time I go, and it's like, guys, there's this opportunity right now. There's somebody coming on, and they're giving a premium of 10 cents out of $1. So if somebody wants to exit the company right now, I mean, this is a good time to do it. Uh, and some of them probably said yes. Some of them probably said no. Uh, but yeah, I think it's a really good idea just to have, when there are like events of liquidity, to go back to your friends and family, which are, again, the ones who gave you the first money and the one who trust in you, and say, you can leave the company right now if this is your choice.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's an interesting, when I think about debts, I kind of always want to pay back people I know first, and I kind of wonder when it comes to business loans if it's thought of the same way, because it's also something where it could be a bigger return for them. So to your point, it's good to give them the option. Awesome. Well, Leonardo, I think this was a great conversation. I think it's a topic people are going to be interested in. So thank you so much for sharing your insight and your experience with us. I think it's a place we can go, right? So again, if you're listening and watching, that we're in the midst of our Money Week. So a series of content around different ways you can secure funding for your business or your operations, or kind of, think about your cash flow a little bit differently. So again, I want to thank Leonardo Shapiro for coming on and talking a little bit about the pros and cons of borrowing or thinking about asking for money from friends and family. Gene, as always, thank you for a great conversation. And if you're interested in learning more about insights and advice for your small business, make sure you check out sba.thehartford.com or smallbizahead.com for our blog. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, let us know what you think. Leave us a comment, rate, review. Let us know if you like content like this, if you'd like to see more information like this, if you have more questions about how to borrow money in your friends and family, and if we should have a follow-up conversation on there. But wherever you are, we hope you're having a great day, and thank you all for listening.